Sure, thanks. Well, you can continue to submit your questions during this question and answer portion. We did have one person, I see we just got a question in, so I'll ask someone next, but we did have someone pre-submit a question. We had Anna from the Morgan Foundation who asked a question about how the environment, climate, and environmental health issues are covered in news that rural women get, and what are the gaps in that specific part of media that we get. Does anyone want to answer it first? Otherwise I'll pass it up.
I will.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure. You know, I'll answer questions first. I try to make space for other people to answer because I'm that person. Yeah, so during my time at the Daily News, I saw that it was really difficult to report on environmental topics, mainly because there's so much to report on day-to-day things like crime, government, features. So the environmental news really became like that, the last priority, not because it's not important, but just because it was hard to reach. A lot of times environmental stories take significant more time and energy to put together because you need to get more well-rounded resources or sources. You also need to talk to a lot of people, and it's kind of hard to do unless if you're localizing a nationwide story or a statewide story. Those were the ones where we were just like, yes. And actually I'm gonna shout out to Maddie Heim right now. She's listening in, and she's one of the journalists that worked with me at the Winona Daily News, and she knows all about this. But yeah, so it is difficult to get that news out there. And you know, I think that if there were more journalists and more ability to spread out the load, we would be able to do that more often. Or if people really supported the stories that do come out. So I'll tell you a little bit about, and I'll be really short with this, but I'll tell you a little bit about how what people read impacts what they get later on. So on our website, on the Winona Daily News website, we have lots of stats to be able to see who is looking at what stories, and we'd be able to see the metrics of like, what's the top story for today, for this hour, for this week, for this year. And notoriously, the funny part is like notoriously for our area, the most read stories would be about restaurants. That's like a big thing for our area. But you know, so in order to get more environmental news, we really need people that once you see one to read it and share it, because then that allows other people to click on it. And like we had talked about earlier, clickbait, but also there's the aspect of just clicking on it and reading it because you're interested in it. The more people that read those stories, the higher those stories get put up on the totem pole. And then the more that we're told as journalists that that's what people want to read. This is an age-old argument of, you know, why is news so negative? Well, it's also because people read negative news. You know, and we talk a lot about that at the Daily News of just, you know, a crime story or a court story is like, is destined to be the top for the day. So ways that we can do that, or we can support more environmental news, is just by supporting it when you see it.
Can I jump in there real fast?
Yeah.
As well. I like what you said about the localizing that too, because I think with the environment issue, as well as, you know, any issue, the benefit of local news is that it connects, it's local, right? It connects to the community. And so environmental news done locally is going to be popular if it connects to like the local lake or you know, the river or something that is it's affecting the local community. The environment is really hard to get a lot of people fired up about, not all, right? But it's hard to get a lot of people really fired up about if it's in the abstract. If we talk about the environment in the abstract, it's hard. But if you talk about it as your local fishing spot, your local swimming hole, or your air quality or something. That's something that is that local news can do, that I think that national news can't do as well, because it's not talking about what your community connects to.
And I'll just pop in on this here. So we talk a lot about what Alyssa's talking about there, about local land and waters. And daily we give people a nature note. It's our phenology show that runs on Tuesdays. We also have kids and classrooms around the state of Minnesota, actually, that send in their daily nature notes to us. So we find darling children's voices on the air talking about the environment is something people really want to hear. We also, it's all in how we kind of craft our message. Last week, we did an interview with a bear expert from the DNR about how bears are now at feeders so much more. And it's because there's been a drought, there's not as much natural food. And so as we went through it, we were asking more and more questions. It turns out bears don't stay in the same place when they hibernate, but they go from like Grand Rapids to Brainerd, for instance. That's how far they travel. They don't go to Florida for the winter time. But as we got to the end of that, though, we said, well, why is it different? And then we started talking about because the climate is different now. And, but we had kind of started off with how people are personally dealing with it. So the phenology show has been on for over almost 30 years, maybe over 30 years now. And we have seen the results. It may be small, but I would say I could probably name at least 5 people that grew up listening to phenology that are now graduate students working in environmental studies around the state or the world. And so we just think it's really important that our broadcast sounds like where we live. And so I often interrupt myself depending on what's going on outside the window, because we have a rain garden and we're right on the banks of the Mississippi. And so nature kind of is our breaking news usually. And we don't think of it as, I think just having a commitment to that every day on the air can make a difference. We also run some quality programming from National Public Radio about climate change on the weekends. But I think that daily little nature note, which you would probably enjoy, you can hear it at our website, kaxc.org. And we don't know, even during the pandemic last spring, we were getting teachers remotely sending in their nature responses. And it was great to hear kids again. And we're hoping for the same. We don't know how their year is going to be, but we know a lot of kids too that are just studying at home and send us reports. So we find that very helpful to educating people about what's going on right now and why.
Awesome. Thank you for your answers. I'm in the environmental field myself, so it was really exciting to hear all of your answers. I promise I didn't plant the question, though. Somebody else's question. We had a question here about the future of journalism and if college students are interested in pursuing the profession these days, and what can we continue to do in this new time to bring unbiased and accurate reporting to the next generation that's coming up? I'm wondering if maybe, Alyssa, you might have a good answer to this.
Yeah, so I'm not in that department, but I know our mass communications department has a journalism major, and it is well populated with students. They do a really good job, from what I understand, again, from an outsider perspective, not knowing exactly what they do over there. But I know that the students that I speak with, they do a really good job of training them to be kind of like the old school journalist, of being unbiased and trying to look at the story. I think that just because journalism is changing in a lot of different ways doesn't mean that we have lost the need for it. And so I think maybe that's why we see students come in with the desire for that. I think students see the desire, the need for that kind of information. Maybe Hannah Lepper would know better, because her mom is actually in that department. But But I know that it's very alive, that we have a lot of students that are very active. Our student newspaper is populated, is run by those students. So it's not something that I would have maybe expected, given the decline of local news lately, that maybe students would have chosen a different major. And maybe they have fewer students than they used to, but I still see quite a few.
Thanks. Hannah, do you have anything you want to add to it?
Sure. So I do not know a lot about journalism, but I am a college student. And my understanding of journalism as a major is that there's a lot of enthusiasm about it. At St. Olaf, we have a really well-run student newspaper, and I think most college campuses do. I do think, however, that there is some discouragement from adults about going into journalism as a career. It is seen by some people as a dying profession, which doesn't mean it's not necessary, but I think there is some like negative connotations around going into it with a major.
Thanks, Hannah. Heidi or Tesla, do you have anything you want to add to that, or the future of journalism in general?
I have a lot to say about this, but Heidi, if you'd like to go ahead, because like I said, I have the tendency of taking over. So you go ahead.
Well, I don't have much because I don't know what college students are interested in, but I would just say that it would be our goal to work with the local community college and Bemidji State University and any university in Minnesota. If we can make a program, that would be a great thing for us if we could have college interns. We do it every once in a while through Itasca Community College, but hasn't always worked out because they're not studying journalism there. They're just kind of helping us out and learning things. So my hope would be we can learn how to become a resource for those students. Hopefully they're there. There's the optimism. On to you, Tesla.
Thanks. Yeah, okay, so another super passionate thing for me, journalism is not dying. Don't worry, people, journalism is not dying. I got this question a lot, and I'm just like super confident that it's not dying. I'll tell you why. Because democracy cannot happen without journalism. Like it won't work, because the whole premise of democracy is that people have information that they need in order to make decisions on who runs our country and what happens in our future. And so without journalism, you can't have that information flow. So it's imperative, and it's critical part of democracy is having journalism. So it's not dying. But it is changing, and that's okay. Things change, industries change, and we will make it through, absolutely. It's changing to be more online, and we've already seen that switch, and I personally was really excited to be at the Daily News during that switch, because for me, I didn't see it as a dying industry. I saw it as an opportunity to recreate the industry and recreate it in our local area. You know, the sad part is like I had alluded to or talked about earlier, is that we don't have as much support for local news, and that we don't have as much support for journalism or journalists. But the need is there, and again, it's that pendulum to where we're understanding what can happen when journalists aren't at the front of our brain, and when we're instead putting out actual fake news, or things that the misinformation, or trusting a blogger instead of a journalist. Not to say that journalists can't be a blogger, but you know, when you go to school for journalism, or when you're taught through the industry, you learn techniques, and you learn how to be critical of information, and you learn how to ask the right questions. You learn it's a skill set. So you know, I'm excited though for the future, because I think that because journalism has been really harped on recently, and since this last presidential election has really seen a lot of negative a lot of negative attention, I think that there's been a real uprising from journalists of like, no, actually, we're not going to take that crap because no, we really care about our jobs and we do a really good job. Like, this is our life. And it's not like we're paid well. I'm sorry, that's going me off on a tangent. But honestly, we're not paid that well. This is a passion of ours. When I was at the Daily News, there was times where I was paid just barely above minimum wage. And I went to college for this. So it's because we care. And there's a lot of people that do still care. And there's a lot of people that are hearing how much flack journalists are getting and are ready to be at our side and ready to take up that flame and that mantle to go forward. So I think that we're going to see more journalists and we're going to see different styles. I'm not sure if it's always going to be the same style of being objective or being completely unbiased. In my opinion, that's a really hard thing to do, because my small explanation of that is, as a journalist, when I gather information, I can collect 10 or 15 facts. But when I write it down and when I put it into a story, I can only include like 5, just because of people's capacity to read that much or because the story flow. So when I pick those 5 facts, I'm picking them based on what I feel is important, based on my background, based on my experiences as a human being. Already by writing the story, it's no longer objective. It's no longer unbiased, because I'm a person and I put it into a story. I think that in the future we're going to see more journalists being open about their opinions, so that people for themselves can really look at that story and say, okay, well, I can see how maybe she put that in there because of this and her background, and understand that that's okay. That, and that's not to say that we need to get super, super into our own opinions, because then we're going away from journalism. But, we're going to see things change, but it is absolutely a necessity, and it is absolutely a critical part of our existence here in the United States, is having journalism. So it is still going to survive. Like, I believe this in my heart.
Thank you, Tesla. Thank you, all of you. I think as our last question, we have a really good one here. And if you have any other parting words of wisdom, this question is, do you have any words of wisdom as to how to determine real news from fake news, or any last parting thoughts on that at all? Heidi, do you want to?
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just go quick. You guys have been putting some great links in here too. Thanks for doing that. There's lots of online ways to just search to see if what you're seeing is real or not. But for me, one of the big things, if something is overly hyped, if it is dramatic, it is probably not real. Same with campaign ads. If it is over the top dramatics, it is not from a source. It is not just from the other candidate. It's part of the political machine. So kind of just paying attention to that, and also keeping a check on when we met to talk about what we were going to talk about. It really sunk home. I think Alyssa said this, but don't quote things that you haven't read the entire article of. Don't kind of keep those kinds of stories going unless you actually know what's going on. And so I'll let you guys speak a little bit more too about online sources, maybe for fake news.
Just the one tip that I find to be particularly helpful is what sources are used. I know that real news, journalists try really hard to provide their sources, and fake news, you can tell what sources are being used. If it's somebody that you don't recognize, if it's not any agency or somebody and it's just some random dude from a coffee shop, it's not probably real. I know that journalists try really hard to provide different kinds of sources. So that's what I try to use to determine not only the veracity of the information, but also it also helps with the bias, like who the sources are.
Yeah, so I would say I have 3 tips on how to tell what's fake news and what's not. And the first one is the website. So take note of what the website is, if it's a .org, or if it has a statement within the website that says kind of what they're going towards. I'm trying to remember a one that I read recently. Actually, yeah, so everything that's going on in Kenosha, Wisconsin, there was a news article that popped up in my feed, and the person who posted it said something along the lines of like, sure, he had a weapon, blah, 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 of course he did. And the article itself was really painting the picture of there being a weapon involved. And when I clicked on it to just see how it was or what the article was, it went to a bluelivesmatter.com website. Not to say that that's not a good website, but one way to understand is, does the website itself have a statement within its website that also relates directly to the type of news article that it's doing? So, take note of that, because there's an interest in reporting just on that news. And that means that they might also be putting a bias on it. Start collecting websites that have factual stories reported in them. It goes back to finding a source that you trust and continuing to support them, but also continue to read their content. And the more that you read a website's content, the more you'll understand what their background is, what their credentials are, what their opinions are, and then you can decipher that for yourself. The second tip is, if it's really odd news, definitely double check. If it's just like super outlandish and you're like, if that's your first reaction, then definitely double check. And you can double check by just throwing in a phrase from that article and putting it back into Google, and then click the news tab so that you're only getting things that have been reported on. And if you're seeing it pop up in many different sources, and especially a source that you trust, then okay, then maybe take it a step further and read the content and see for yourself. Use your best judgment. But if it's something outlandish, or like Heidi said, it was just like kind of like almost clickbait, definitely be wary of it. And my last tip is click the links that they put in there. So many times a news article will refer to a document or will refer to something else, and they'll put a link in there, a one word that's linked to something. Click on it, because if you click on it and it actually brings you to a document and you can quickly sift through, then it's more factual than if it weren't. There's been times where I've read an article and I've clicked the link and it goes to nothing. Or it goes to a page that's under construction or something like that. And that's because it was fake, and because they just wanted to put that in there to show that they're sources, in the hopes that no one would actually click on it and see for themselves. So, and just a quick tip, if an article is quoting something, like say a specific phrase, and they've got it in quotes, and then they also have a link to that document, you can highlight that one phrase, copy it, click onto the link, go into the document, and then search, put Control F, which is find within this document. That's a quick key to find something in this document. Throw that phrase into that find search bar, and then it will pop up if it's really there. So it's really quick. That's something that we used a lot, is Control F and find it for yourself. So those are my 3 things: website, determine if it's really odd, and click the links.
Thanks so much, Tessa. And thanks so much, everyone. Thanks to our presenters, and thanks to Erica and Hannah and Jaslyn and Hannah for supporting this today and presenting. And just a couple announcements. Our next webinar in September is going to be around family care and how that disproportionately falls to women. And then in October, we're going to be doing a webinar on the women's recession, how COVID has really turned into the women's recession. So some fun stuff coming forward, some good topics. We will be capturing the chat, and we will have the recording up on the website, plus a meeting summary. So any of the links that were in the chat will be available on the website. And if we come across any other information, that people want to send in, we're more than happy to put that up on the website so we can give folks great links and information. So thank you everyone again for your time. Thanks so much and have a great week. Thank you.